Hello and welcome to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson, a podcast for those seeking the ultimate in wine, food, and travel. Each week she interviews winemakers, chefs, celebrities, and a variety of guests that shape the way we enjoy life.
Hello, this is Ilona Thompson with Palate Exposure. I'm here with David Blackmore, a global brand ambassador for Glenmorangie.
Indeed.
Glenmorangie.
You got it right.
It's a good word.
Indeed.
I'm so happy to have him on my show. He's incredibly insightful, and we're going to talk all kinds of things. Bourbon, we're going to talk all kinds of things. Brand, cocktails. This is going to be a really exciting discussion. So let's start with you.
Yeah.
How in the world did you wind up in that realm?
Kind of a roundabout way with a couple of moments of real kind of focus in amongst there. I graduated university in Scotland, didn't know what I wanted to do for several years, sort of bounced around various jobs in banks and all the rest of it. And then I got a job with a friend of mine running a small corporate events management company. And everything was going great, our little business. And then 9/11 happened and it kind of put pay to our business. So I was in need of a job. And I had just started to discover the delights of single malt Scotch. Even though I was born in Scotland, and grew up in Scotland, I didn't really like Scotch whisky, if I'm honest. And I started getting a taste for it when I was maybe about 21, 22. And so I'd become a member of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. And I decided once the company I was working for folded that I would go down to see them and see if I could get some bar shifts just to pay the bills. And one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I'd moved to London to run their venue down there. And in that period of time, I met the Glenmorangie Master Distiller, Dr. Bill Lumsden, and that was the moment where I realised I wanted to be in this industry. So that's where the kind of focus came in. I spent a year either emailing him or calling him every week for a year, saying I want a job as an ambassador for your company. And in the end, he kind of just caved in and said, "Right, come on up, there's a position available, interview." And that was it. I got the job and moved to the States in 2005.
Wow.
It was going to be like a 3-month thing. So thank you very much.
Great state of Texas.
Yes, so initially it was New York, and I was going to be there for 3 years. And in that period of time, I met my wife, and now I'm here, basically full time. But my job is global ambassador, so I am traveling internationally from a US base. I probably spend about 75% of my time in the States at any one time. So I know.
No, but I'm so heartened by your persistence. I hear those stories a lot. When you want something, just get after it.
Yeah, I guess I've kind of forgotten it a bit these days, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
In my older age, I feel like I could do with a bit of that again. I have to remind myself that, yeah, it worked. It worked. When I really was persistent, I got what I wanted. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So Glenmorangie, obviously a storied brand. Tell us a little bit about it, just like a helicopter view.
Sure, absolutely. So officially, if you look at the label, it says founded in 1843. In reality, we suspect that there was distilling happening at the site, the Glenmorangie farm, for maybe 100 years before that, but just not legal. So 1843 is the year that we got our distilling license to legitimately make single malt Scotch whisky. William Matheson was the guy who started the company. The Maitland brothers, though, have an important role. They bought the distillery in 1886, and in 1887 put in the type of still that we have to this day, which is really a design of still that was popular at the time for making gin. They're very tall. They're the tallest stills in all of Scotland. And spare you a chemistry lesson, but it means that our spirit is highly refluxed in the neck of the still, and that means that we get this very elegant, fragrant new make spirit. It really sets the style for Glenmorangie, and that almost mandates the type and quality of casks that we use to mature our whiskey. So that leads through to the early 80s, when we as a company pioneered the idea of finishing, and that's using a secondary barrel, usually a barrel that's contained some form of wine, to add nuance and other kind of subtle flavour to our already great Highland single malt.
Wow. So I have a mental image that's literally now etched into my brain, which is an image of giraffe.
Yes.
To your early point. So there's a lovely masterclass that I had the pleasure of attending yesterday at Napa Valley Film Festival. Great event. You guys should totally consider it because it's very diverse. There's not just movies, but whiskey education, just like that.
Yeah.
And that still that you said is the tallest in the market.
Same height as a fully grown adult male giraffe. Random fact.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you remember that alone, now I will never look at your bottle the same again.
Exactly. I do get asked sometimes though, like, wait, we didn't know that giraffes were native to Scotland. I'm like, no, they're not. It's an analogy to let you remember the key thing that really sets our distillery style apart.
I think it's so clever. And has anybody emulated it since then, or are you still solo in that endeavor?
We are the tallest stills in Scotland, which is obviously a precarious place to be, I guess. I'd never thought about it like that, because someone could claim that. I don't know what the point would be, but
but
bragging rights.
No, but I'm also very curious about the innovation that happened with respect to aging the product in wine barrels. Who conceptualized it? How did it come about?
It actually predates our current master distiller, but he's regarded as kind of father of it because he ran with it. He came to the company within about 4 years of us doing our initial experimentation, and saw the value of it and really ran with it and developed it in a myriad of different ways. So Dr. Bill Lumsden, our master distiller, is regarded as the most awarded master distiller in the whiskey industry anywhere.
How exciting is that?
He came across. He's done a lot of that research, and underneath it all, we've also done a lot of research into American oak, which is what our whiskey and most other whiskies in Scotland are initially aged in, or fully aged in sometimes. So we only use our barrels twice at Glenmorangie. We try to source barrels from slow-growing white oak from the Ozark Mountains that is more porous microscopically. It's called tight-grained oak, but it's actually more porous microscopically, which increases the in-drink of spirit into the barrel. Think of it like a sponge that's more absorbent, and that spirit that's then in the sponge can pull out more flavour out of the wood. So we're doing a lot of research into that as well. Beyond that, we're now looking into other areas beyond just the wood where we can develop flavour. So toasting the barley like coffee beans and then using it. So if you were a brewer, you'd do that to make stout. Well, we've done it, made stout and then distilled that and made a whiskey that tastes like espresso coffee. There's fun stuff you can do.
Cool.
And lots more stuff that's in the works that I can't tell you about yet.
No, but I love the experimental part because you're such a classic brand, but you're also doing so many different things in other space. And I'm curious to talk about the wood for a moment. So you said Ozark, obviously that's where most of the American oak comes from. That's suitable for barrel making. So you use new barrels, right? No, we are using barrels that have, we do use some new barrels, but the predominant barrel from America that we use has had bourbon or Tennessee whiskey in it for between 4 and 6 years. It just takes some of the tannins out and gives us a barrel that's slightly seasoned. Think about it. An American whiskey is regarded old if it gets to 10 years old, but a 10-year-old Scotch is regarded as young, which is kind of a weird idea. In general, Scotch whiskey ages for longer than American whiskey in a barrel. So we don't want the full force of the American oak necessarily from day one with a virgin oak cask. We want to pull out a slightly more demure cask to take out a little bit, take the flavor profile out slower over a longer time. It gives you more complexity. Complexity and maybe longevity, is that an argument that could be made?
Yeah, because the other thing is that we get what's called oxidative maturation. As the angel share leaves the headspace of the barrel, we get this oxidative maturation that sweetens the spirits, and if we have too much oak influence, that's going to swamp that. So you want to just dial it back slightly. We have done experiments with virgin American oak, made whiskies that are delicious but almost taste like a bourbon, which is great, but kind of pointless as a Scotsman.
Yes, I hear that. So in terms of French oak, you mentioned Limousin yesterday for some of the products. Tell us about that.
So we have a product called Glenmorangie Nectar d'Or that is 10 years aged in American ex-bourbon American white oak barrels, and then the whiskey is physically transferred for 2 years, finishing in barriques that were made of are made of Limousin oak, French oak, that have previously contained Sauterne dessert white wine. So we get the balance of the sweetness from the dessert wine. We get an earthiness because it's the great white wine of the world. It's our dessert white wine, it's Sauterne. And we get a spiciness from the French oak. And that spiciness brings the balance back. Otherwise it would just be a very flabby, overly sweet white wine finish, you know.
So you also had this really extraordinary offering yesterday. I feel so lucky to try it, to have tried it. So Gaia is involved in that equation.
Yes,
so
this
tell
was
us all about
a sneak peek behind the warehouse doors, I guess, and not something that's planned at all to be released. It may or may not, I don't know. But it was a 23-year-old barrel sample of Glenmorangie that had spent its last 15 years finishing in Gaia Barbaresco casks.
Wow.
We probably will, if and when we ever release it, we won't be able to, for legal reasons, put Gaia on the label, anything like that. So this was just a little sneak peek to try something very different.
Again, I really admire the experimental part of your business, because clearly you have the resources, but also the will to try different things.
It's obviously, I mean, it'd be nice and easy and simple business if we just filled American oak barrels every day and let them age for different ages and pumped them out as a 10-year-old, a 15 and 18, blah, blah, blah. But we want to, arguably that first finished whiskey that Glenmorangie came out with anywhere in the world back in 1987 was part of the spark that reinvigorated the Scotch whisky industry, and is partly responsible at least for the boom in interest in whisky around the world now. And it's because we offer more interest than just an age statement. We offer this whole complexity of flavour, influenced by other outside things, casks, the barley. It suddenly elevates single malt Scotch to the kind of level of fine wine.
That's a great comparison, because wine at its highest peak is really truly transcendent of the sum of its parts. It's more than just fermented grape juice that's been executed well by a winemaker. It becomes a story unto itself, and what you're describing is what you strive for, right?
Absolutely.
In the whiskey category.
We are trying to create, at the end of the day, all the innovation in the world is pointless if it doesn't taste good. But the innovation is there to drive new flavors. That's it.
So if, in the eyes of the consumer, if they were to identify your brand in a certain manner that makes sense to you, like if you were to crystallize, what is the differentiation between Glenmorangie and everything else?
That's probably it. I mean, just the idea, the driving force is flavor. It's, is it delicious?
Delicious.
If it's not delicious, then it's not going to be released. And so we have done. It's real innovation. We have mistakes, but you don't get to see those.
There's a famous character in Napa Valley, and I say character kind of in jest. He actually is really a master at his craft. Scott Beatty. He is a beverage director at Meadowood.
Okay.
He refers to it as directive of deliciousness, and clearly you adhere to that staunchly.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great to hear, because again, you mentioned that this category is now being saturated because of the demand. Actually, there's not enough of it. But certainly a lot of players, a lot of craft distillations. So for you to, that's been around since 1800, for you to not just maintain the market share, but really maintain the appeal and promote something that people would really want to participate in, that brings joy and pleasure and also is cellar worthy.
I always try and talk about these days, because we've been doing it for quite a while now. I try and bring home the idea in internal meetings all the time. We have a tradition of innovation. That's what it is. Innovation is thought of as something new all the time, but we have a tradition of that, and we have to live up to that.
So it's a bit of pressure, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, because we did the first wood finish with the 63 vintage, launched in 87. We came out with the world's first port wood finish, the world's first Madeira wood finish. We've done those. What do we do next? Our master distiller is not very interested in repeating his former successes. He wants to be on to new things.
And that is such a healthy mentality, and also clearly so advantageous to the consumer, because the harder you work, the better we drink.
Absolutely. We've been playing around with wild yeast strains. We came out with a whiskey beginning of this year, Glenmorangie Alta, where 10 years ago, bit longer ago now, we actually took barley from the fields where we grow a little bit of our own barley around Glenmorangie House in the Cadbull estate, and we took the barley and we swabbed it and we isolated several yeast strains, because yeast is everywhere, and we cultured up a couple of those, and with the help of Lallemande, who are the kind of yeast experts, global yeast experts, they identified a final yeast strain that we went with. They cultured that up, and then we used it to ferment the very barley crop that we took it from. We did that quick enough that we could do that, and then we distilled that and we aged it in American oak, and that was Alta. So wild yeast found in the actual barley.
That's taking it to a whole extra
ridiculous level.
I love it. This is nano level.
And you know, the flavor difference between that and the normal yeast was very marginal, but hey, it doesn't matter. We want to experiment. We wouldn't have known if we hadn't done it.
Do you participate in the actual blending trials?
I do from time to time. I'm part of the whiskey creation team when I'm back in Scotland. But yeah, my primary and secondary and tertiary role is really to be out there every day, face of the brand. But I have to say, the opportunity to get back in the lab is the best bit.
I can tell. You're so animated right now. You look so happy when you talk about the product itself.
It's an awesome process. And I've got a few, we do some think tanks, and I've got a couple of ideas that are in the works, top secret ideas, that one of which will be, when it comes out, the first time probably in human history that anything's been made in this way.
That is so exciting.
Probably the last time too, because it's very expensive to make.
But that's what folks need to realize when the brand has the resources.
Yeah.
You know, people tend to say, "Oh, I want to support my micro distillery that's in my neighborhood or whatever," which is great.
It is great.
It's great, but the resource pool is very
absolutely
different.
We were family owned until 2004, and now we're part of the Moët Hennessy group.
Yes.
And what that's given us is huge amount of resources to do things, and not just that, when something doesn't work out, an experiment is a failure, which it's not really a failure because we learned something, but we don't have to bottle it and sell it to you.
Yes, you're not economically bound.
Yes, and if you are a very small producer, you have faced with bottling it and selling it, or going out of business.
Yeah.
It's really that
choice.
simple.
Yes,
so we're fortunate in that respect, definitely.
No, I mean, and all the little tidbits, even what I learned yesterday in the seminar, it shows me the care, the intentionality. I mean, it's a hallmarks of the brand that cares a lot.
We've got some developments currently ongoing right now, which I can't tell you about exactly. I'll be able to tell you about in the spring of next year, which will really show you how much we're doubling down on future innovations.
I can't wait.
We're spending a lot of money on an ability to really innovate for the future. So.
That's great to hear. Are the markets different in Scotland and in Europe in general, in the US?
I don't spend a lot of my time out in the market in Europe at all. My focus is the States and Asia Pacific. So Europe, it's hard to say, but yeah, there's been kind of historical brand loyalties. You know, there's one brand of Speyside malt that for some reason has been massive in Italy for the last 30 years. You know, but there are broadly similarities, I guess, as well. In terms of what consumers are looking for, and I think consumers are looking to drink less and better.
I
think
that's
hopefully.
encouraging. Yes.
Or maybe it's just me willing them to do that.
It's a Jedi mind trick. It works sometimes.
Yes. Demand for consumers are looking for something that has a genuine character to it, for authenticity. I think the days of brash marketing are hopefully gone for a while at least, and that real stories, genuine products sell.
Well, the market has been democratized quite a bit, which I think is healthy.
And the internet, you know, the rise of the internet and apps and message boards and Facebook private groups where people talk about things, you know, everybody has the opportunity to be very, very well informed about the products, which is good.
Yes.
And it holds us to account. So, you know, if we come up with something just in one market, I'll get a call the next day from somebody in Massachusetts or wherever saying, well, why can't we get it? Mm-hmm. So it's an evolving business, that's for sure, in terms of the market. Yeah.
So for a new consumer that has curiosity, like just say baseline curiosity,
yeah.
do you have recommendations? Because it's such a huge, overwhelming world. First
thing I would say is don't let anyone intimidate you with the world of single malt. There's this perception that it's intimidating and snobby. I quite aggressively stand against that. Get out there, order a glass of Scotch whiskey, and make up your own decision whether you like it. Trust your own palate. Take advice, but don't take instruction. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. Don't let people talk at you.
Yeah, absolutely. I will hopefully always say, this is what I like and this is how I drink it, but this is me, and if you don't want to and you found your way, that's absolutely great. There's so much resource out there online, so you can in your own time go on a host of good websites, connect with other whiskey geeks. Some of them will be, just like anywhere else on the internet, you'll get bad actors out there, but you should be able to form an opinion and form a love for the category, just without spending too much money, buying a dram here or there in a good bar. And once you found out what you like, then you can stump for a bottle when you know you're going to like it. You don't need to buy a bottle blind and be terrified that you might hate it. You should be able to find a good bar anywhere near you that will have at least a reasonable set of single malts these days. What else? Yeah, I mean, that's there are so many good books if you want to be more traditional to it.
Yeah.
There's so many good whiskey books out there,
Yeah.
Particularly these days, more being published all the time. I need to stop buying whiskey books maybe because I run out of space. But and just enjoy it.
Yes.
It should be fun.
Yes.
That's all.
Indeed. Speaking of bars, great
Yes.
segue into the cocktail world, the great gateway
Yes.
to spirits.
Yeah.
Again, a broad subject. We're gonna go after whiskey application in cocktails.
Yeah, I mean, I know we chatted about this before,
We did.
And I know that a lot of people perceive Scotch as something that's very hard to make a cocktail with. I tend to disagree with that. I think it maybe just shows a lack of familiarity with Scotch, if you think that.
I can hear bartender screaming
bit.
somewhere right now.
I guess, I mean, again, it's not meant in a negative way. It's just
No, understood.
I guess maybe because I'm so familiar with Scotch, I'm okay with it because I'm kind of biased to want my cocktails to taste a bit of Scotch.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm definitely not an unbiased opinion on that. I think it's perfectly okay to put single malt in a Scotch because, like I said, once it's in your glass, it's yours. There's no reason not to. Sometimes, obviously, single malt Scotch can be cost prohibitive if you're running a bar. Pour cost is a big issue. But why not? Enjoy it if that's what you like. I sometimes wonder whether the idea of it being a gateway in terms of somebody trying a Scotch whisky cocktail and then finally falling in love with Scotch and drinking it neat. I'm of two minds. I'm not sure how that translates. I don't know where the jump from drinking it in a cocktail to drinking it neat happens. I haven't seen that happen very often.
That's interesting. So the classic cocktails have been growing at old fashioned, right?
I guess so. Yeah. A few others. Trying to think. I'm not a massive cocktail expert, as you can tell. But what else?
Year round and a lot.
And then there's kind of weird other options, like as we're going to try later today, an Ardbeg Bloody Mary is.
See, that is not something I would associate with whiskey ever.
Yeah, but if you think about the flavour profile for Ardbeg 10, it's kind of this smoky bacon note. So what's better than
That's true.
Smoky bacon, tomatoes,
Sounds
and
very
alcohol
rich
for breakfast?
and savory. Yeah, well, if you're approaching from that point of view, God, yes.
I think it can work really well. It's kind of broken the Bloody Mary for me though, because if I'm on a flight somewhere and I want a Bloody Mary, I'm not going to find Ardbeg on a plane, unfortunately. So I always have to make do.
Yes.
I think cocktails have certainly helped rejuvenate the category of Scotch whisky a bit, and single malt
Yeah.
Scotch whisky, by broadening, showing people that it can be a bit broader. We were probably the victim of our own success, because for so long as an industry, we marketed Scotch as kind of the elite, the elite, the elite spirit. Whereas it doesn't need to be that. It can be. I love the fact that the seminar yesterday that we did here was probably easily 50% female attendees.
Indeed.
Thank God, at last.
Yes.
I'm so glad that women have started to realise that the lie that men told them that Scotch was just for them was a lie.
Yes, absolutely. And also the younger generation,
Absolutely.
you want to engage them because
Totally.
it is perceived a bit as an older person's drink.
Part of that, I think, is because single malt Scotch costs a little bit more, and therefore, on average, you probably need to be a little bit older to have the buying power.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the Bay Area. Plenty of younger people with plenty of money. So I think that was probably the only reason that there's any truth in that anymore. But I got into Scotch at a relatively late age for a Scotsman, but 23, still pretty young.
Yeah.
And I've never understood it's just for old white rich guys thing.
Yeah.
I've never got it.
Yeah.
Although I'm rapidly becoming an old white not so rich guy.
Wise.
Becoming the stereotype, unfortunately. I've never understood it. I just kind of, I don't know, we're blinking to it. I like this, so I'm going to drink it.
So whiskey, we talked about it earlier, has properties much like wine that has this element of timelessness to it that was very interesting.
I find that drinking some single malts can literally give me flashbacks, like visual flashbacks to memories from childhood that I'd completely forgotten sometimes. It's wild. Just certain aromatics in the whiskey will just take me straight back to somewhere. And then there's the other part of it that, even a young single malt is 10 years old, let's say, perceived as young, is 10 years old. Some of the whiskey we tasted yesterday was 23 years old. You think about that spirit sat in total darkness and complete silence in an oak barrel for 23 years. It's just how much the world's changed in those 23 years. Everything in your life, everyone's lives, what happened in those last 23 years? And the whiskey just sat there slowly maturing until the moment you drank it. Just that blows my mind.
It's such a formidable thought.
Yeah.
And I think much like wine, it shows up differently every time you taste it, and who you taste it with.
Place and mood is really important in terms of how a whiskey tastes. I get asked all the time, "What's your favourite?" And I could answer that at that particular moment in time, but I won't give you the same answer an hour later, probably.
Yeah, it's very much alive.
Yeah. I find, for example, Ardbeg, sitting outside on a cold day, preferably a slightly windy cold day,
that's interesting.
like yesterday maybe. Perfect. That's when I think Ardbeg tastes best. Just amazing.
And you mentioned Ardbeg, so we have to talk about it now. What is that?
So Ardbeg is the Glenmorangie company's other distillery that we rescued in '97 from basically demolition. It had been closed through most of the '80s and mothballed through most of the '90s. And it was put up for sale, and with the prospect that if it didn't get bought, it was going to be flattened. Glenmorangie Company came in and rescued Ardbeg. It's about as far away physically from Glenmorangie as you could get and still be in Scotland. It's off the southwest coast of Scotland on an island called Islay. And in terms of flavour profile, Glenmorangie and Ardbeg are the bookends of the flavour spectrum of Scotch whisky. Yeah. If Glenmorangie is all about elegant fragrance and complexity and wine finishing, Ardbeg is about peat and smoke and earthiness and in your face, and if you don't like it, okay, I like it. No offense.
Sounds very assertive.
Oh yeah, very assertive. But it's nobody quite likes Ardbeg. It's a very extreme response to the first glass of Ardbeg. People are either falling in love with it to the point where I know dozens of people who have the Ardbeg logo tattooed on their body somewhere.
What?
So there's that extreme, or the other extreme, people will literally spit it out. And I'm okay with it. I'm absolutely okay with that. We are who we are, and what I find though is that most people over time fall in love with it. Very few people, given time, don't end up falling in love with Ardbeg. And some people, just day one, become Ardbeg freaks, peat freaks, overnight. So it's wild and wonderful stuff. And we're going to, today, since we're up in Napa, I thought it'd be fun to take the word and the idea of terroir in a different direction. And since peat, which is what we dry and burn under our barley to give it the smokiness, is literally earth, terroir. I thought it'd be fun.
I never thought of it that way, because smoke just intellectually makes you think of something, up in the air, not something in the ground.
We're digging the earth up. We're literally digging the earth up and flavouring our whiskey with earth.
Huh.
So you don't get much more terroir than that.
No, clearly not. And now I'm not anti-peat, but I'm peat light. So now you're making me rethink my position, because that mind shift, that this is really the origin of this is so authentic. I
love the fact that the human mind is usually very flexible as well. So I can usually force myself, and I do this on a mental exercise regularly. If it's something I eat or drink that I don't like, I'll often force myself to try and change my mind and say, no, I do like it, and usually it works. You can
really
quickly, I can completely change my opinion on it if I really, really force myself to go, right, well, what is it? Oh, come on. So I think peat can be like that as well. And one of the things that I've discovered is going to the island of Islay. If you spend a few days there, when you first get there, it's like the first glass of Ardbeg. It's like, wow, that's smoky. After a few days on Islay, drinking smoky whiskies, you don't really taste the peat anymore.
Context, huh?
You kind of tune that out, and you get to taste everything else underneath. And there's lots of complexity under there. I always wonder, kids growing up on Islay, particularly living in the town of Port Ellen, where the maltings is, and there's peat smoke in the air every day from this malting. If you've born on Islay and you've lived in Port Ellen pretty much your entire life, the first time you go to mainland Scotland and the air doesn't smell smoky and peaty, you must think, oh, wow, this smells weird.
Because your frame of reference is that.
Yeah, absolutely. It must be totally weird. Like, what's that smell?
Wow, what a powerful thought. Yeah.
So same with whiskey. After I've been lucky enough to spend whole weeks on Islay, come back off Islay to the mainland and take a glass of an unpeated malt, and it often is the shock. It's like, whoa, what's that? That's the shock.
That is so interesting. So available in the US market, I assume?
Yes, Ardbeg and Glenmorangie, both available across the US. We're pretty well distributed. Obviously, all good liquor stores, and most good bars and restaurants too.
So no excuse not to go after it and shock your non-smoke, non-peaty loving friends.
You should
take it to the
jump
extreme.
Straight in and try an Ardbeg. Absolutely. We have actually last year came out with an Ardbeg called Ardbeg Anno. That is our attempt to not completely lose what Ardbeg is. It's still very smoky, but to kind of polish off the edges a bit for this expression, so it maybe is slightly more accessible to people that are maybe having a little bit of a hard time with or want to try and get into the smoky whiskey category. So Ardbeg Anno would be a great option. It's got some sherry cask influence, and we've just tried to polish the edges off it a bit.
What's your favorite dish to pair with whiskey?
See, there's so many different flavors of whiskey, so that's so tough.
It's a loaded question.
Cheese and Scotch whiskey. You can pair so many different types of cheeses with so many different styles of whiskey that it's a no-brainer almost. That works well. Oysters and Ardbeg. You'd think, well, it's such a delicate flavour up against all the smoke, but it's all kind of the same seaside experience.
No, but I mean, I'm thinking cooked oysters like Rockefeller, right?
That can work as well. I like, and I know it's not the sort of oyster you get on the West Coast here, but big, juicy, plump, creamy oysters.
Oh my God,
and
my mouth
a dash of
waters.
Ardbeg on the top. just amazing.
Did you guys hear that? It's always oysters and champagne. That is the total at the end of the spectrum, and I'm loving it.
There you go.
I am so going home to try it. You can tell I'm in the practical application mode. So, second question.
Yes.
to drip or not to drip the Watergate.
Yes, to add a dash of water. First thing is do whatever you want when it's in your glass.
Yes.
But yes, if you want to try and really explore the full complexity of a single malt, water is usually a good idea. The one exception I find sometimes, it's just a word of caution, is I think the older a whiskey gets, certainly when it gets up to sort of 18, 20 and beyond, they're actually quite fragile. Even though the flavors can be really in your face, they're quite fragile beasts. So be very careful. I've ruined too many old whiskey samples by dropping too much water in, and then there's not much way back, unless you've got a lot of money to buy some more whiskey to throw in there. But older whiskies are often fragile. You'll find me not adding much water, if any, to even cask strength old whiskies can fall apart quickly.
That is such good advice.
But water's a good idea. We'd certainly do it when we make the whiskey. When we're analysing samples, we're always adding water and nosing and nosing and nosing. That's how we do it. Remember, unless it says cask strength on the bottle, all Scotch whisky has had water added at bottling as well. So absolutely, you can add some water, and it should make it a bit more complex.
Some fantastic advice, lots of practical tips, but also lots of history. I'm so thankful that you sat down with me today, David.
Of course, yeah,
and I learned a lot, and I can't wait for your other wisdom in a form of a masterclass.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
More to come. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks again for tuning in to the official podcast of Palate Exposure featuring Ilona Thompson. We'll see you again next week.